Hello, my darlings. So, last week's video was really heavy and really tough to deal with, even if you're, accepting of this type of information. So I wanted to give you something light and useful, all right, to carry you through the interim. And before I, in a fit of anti-YouTube censorship rage, deleted all of my videos. I had a video about the Cold Steel heavy-duty cane sword, which was quite popular. A lot of people looked at it and chose to purchase this item, much to my pleasure, because it's something that is extremely good for self-defense, for long-term security. For people of all ages, it's frankly, as a collector of swords, this is, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, the best value you can get for a self-defense sword. Now, when you get into the hobby of sword collecting, you have to deal with people who are gay about swords being historically accurate. So if you want to buy a historically accurate, functional sword, you're going to have to spend at least $500. However, if you want to buy a sword that is just functional, then you can get a good item for under $200, but you have to look out for the cheap pieces of garbage, because there's lots of stainless steel wall hangers out there just waiting to take your money. All right, so you have to know the difference between good steel and bad steel, and you have to look at a lot of reviews to be able to tell the difference. All right, so I can tell you from personal experience that the Cold Steel heavy-duty cane sword is everything you will ever need. If you're looking for something to fill in that melee, the melee gap for self-defense. All right, so we all know guns make swords obsolete, of course. However, if you know anything about anything, then you know that within 7 yards, a blade is more deadly than a gun. And the vast majority of gunfights happen within 7 yards. So, I would ask you, do you want something that, if you've ever watched Cops, then you know that the vast majority of rounds that are exchanged in a real gunfight miss. And I will tell you this, a sword never runs out of bullets. Am I telling you that a sword is better than a gun? No, I will not tell you that. But a person who has a gun and a sword is going to win the battle 7 times out of 10. Alright? So, even a shitty sword is better than just your meaty fucking hand. Alright? So, what you've got here with the Cold Steel Cain Sword is you're looking at something that you can use. You can use it as a cane, alright? If you're an old man like I am, you can use it as a cane. And no one is going to ask you a question if they have any kind of decency about them. However, we know that many people have absolutely no decency about them, and so you may need something else to carry with you. However, the Cold Steel Cain Sword is a perfectly functional cane. It can be used as a cane. Its biggest fault is the fact that it rattles a little bit, but you can fix that by stuffing styrofoam down the tube, alright? Which is what I recommend. Stuff styrofoam down the tube to prevent this rattling. Now your styrofoam won't last, it'll get mashed up, so you'll have to replace it, which is why mine still rattles. I have not replaced my original styrofoam. There's fucking bits of styrofoam down there that are all mashed up because I have not replaced them, but I will in time. If I ever expect to have to walk around with this, I will put new styrofoam down there so that it does not rattle. Okay? Now, onto the sword. So as you can see, what you get here is a straight, rapier-like. It's very, very slashy. Let's see here. You've got on the positive side, you've got a straight blade from here all the way to the tip. All right, it's about 25 inches, guessing offhand, and you've got a false edge for about 25% of the blade to the tip. What that lets you do is it lets you use it like a single bladed sword. So imagine you get into a fight with somebody who has a baseball bat. So you can block, you can put your hand on the blade and block. All right, this in my opinion, that's very important. But you still have the benefit of the false edge, which is not really a false edge, it's a real edge. All right, for backslashes. And of course, it's excellent for thrusting. Excellent for thrusting. Now this is it's a very fast blade. Alright. I'm not going to take the time to exhibit how fast it is because, frankly, most of my audience is probably, you're probably not sword people. If you are sword people, then you know what I'm talking about and you can go figure it out for yourself. But if you can take the one major disadvantage is there's no hand protection, which you don't need if you don't expect to get in a fight with somebody else wielding a sword. You don't need a cross guard. If you're into swords, if you're a Skalagram viewer, then you need to hear that you do not need a cross guard for modern self-defense purposes, because you are not going to get into a self-defense situation with someone using a sword. You're just not gonna. Alright? You don't need a cross guard. Alright, so this doesn't have one. That being the case, a cross guard is also useful for preventing your hand from sliding up onto the blade and being cut to ribbons. Well, I would suggest that in a real fight, you're not going to feel minor injuries. And in a real fight, your primary goal is to not die. So a few cuts to your sweet little fingers are not a big deal, my darlings, right? However, my advice would be to fit this corner into the sweet spot of your hand, right there. You see, you keep this corner here, all right? You marry that with that and keep it there. And in my experience, this makes it a very pliant weapon, all right? But it's not just one weapon, you see, because the shaft in which the blade is hidden is also a very formidable weapon of its own, which means you can dual wield, my Dungeons and Dragons nerds. You can dual wield, or you can hand this to your friend who has nothing. Alright? And now, to keep this missive short, I would like you to enjoy some test cuttings. And go!
I had a hard time in a terrible land, waiting for the good Lord to open his hand, but the good Lord's mercy's in high demand, and I had a hard time in a terrible land. Well, I'm looking for a job difference in a bad neighborhood. You got rats in the water and bugs in the world. Listen up, son, you better do what you should, or you'll have a hard time in a terrible land, waiting for the good Lord to open his hand. But the good Lord's mercy's in high demand, and I had a hard time in a terrible land. Evil to the east, evil to the west, evil a terrible